to our Black History Month live stream series, where we'll be focusing on several issues related to Black Americans in this wonderful 2022 year that we're just getting into. For our first session, we'll be focusing on the state of Black America with a wonderful and riveting conversation between President and CEO of Prosperity Now's Gary Cunningham and our own President and CEO, Lenwood Long Sr. of the Alliance. So before we get into this conversation, we just want to make a quick introduction of our speakers. We want to thank them for their time and for joining us today. After I introduce them, they're both going to take a minute to talk about their organizations and the wonderful work that they're doing, and then specifically get into the conversation of how that work relates to some of the struggles that Black Americans are still experiencing and how we can implement effective strategies to begin to move the needle. So first, I'll introduce Gary Cunningham, again, the president and CEO of Prosperity Now. He's been with the organization since 2019, and he's helping them to shift from an agenda of mitigating the effects of a broken racist system to transforming that system by testing, investing, and scaling effective solutions. Prior to joining Prosperity Now, he's been a top leader in the philanthropic, healthcare, public policy, and educational sector. In addition to leading North Point, he was the associate superintendent of Minneapolis Public Schools, the deputy director of civil rights for the city of Minneapolis, and the CEO of the Metropolitan Economic Development Association, or MEDA, a minority entrepreneurial organization. He also served as the first husband of Minneapolis when his wife, Betsy Hodges, was the mayor. And then for a quick introduction of Lenwood Long, he again is currently the president and CEO of the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs. He has more than 30 years of experience in community economic development with human resources and other business management skills. He's the founder and president of BVNL Associates, a service-disabled veteran-owned firm providing organizations with consulting and technical assistance in community economic development, project management, human resources, strategic planning, organizational assessment, and business management. And he's the former president and CEO of Carolina Small Business Development Fund, a CDFI nonprofit organization based in North Carolina. So with that, I will hand things over to Gary first so we can learn a little bit more about Prosperity Now.
Well, thank you, Amber, and it is so good to be here with you and Lenwood. Thank you for inviting me, particularly around African American History Month, which is so critical in terms of the social cohesion of our community. Let me talk about Prosperity Now. It's one of my favorite subjects to talk about, so I'll be brief, but I'll be to the point. You know, this pandemic has really forced us to confront the realities that racism still exists in our country and remains dangerous for people of color, particularly African Americans. It is often embedded in institutions, and some of it is overt, meaning you can actually see it coming, and others it's covert, where you can't see it coming at all. Given everything that surfaces these days around the issues that people of color face in this country, Prosperity Now has recentered our work on focusing on advancing racial and economic justice by investing in bold new ideas and working deeply at both the grassroots and national levels to impact the entire ecosystem that is impacting African Americans, so that all of us, no matter who we are in this country, can actually participate and be a part of our economic systems within this country. Our economy is not working for everyone, and it's not intended to in the first place. The structures that have been set up weren't designed to serve our needs for our whole community. Some of us have made it kind of past the vicissitudes of poverty, but most of our people are still locked in an interlocking system of poverty within our country. Prosperity Now focuses on those grassroots solutions to impact the entire ecosystem. We believe we must go on beyond the work that has happened just at the national level and actually focus our work in the places where our community is being impacted. We do this in a number of ways. Financial stability and financial inclusion and security are the core of our mission. And I'm not going to go into all of the things we do because we're a nationwide organization focused like a laser beam on changing the system for our community. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Gary, for just giving us a small window of insight into all the great things that Prosperity Now is doing in your focus. Now we're going to ask Lenwood Long Sr. to tell us more about the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs.
Thank you so much, Amber. Let me first thank my good friend, Gary Cunningham, to help us celebrate and start this series, Black History Month. Gary certainly with Prosperity Now bring much to the table in terms of insight and the work they do. The African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs well, I actually founded in 2018, a relative short period of time. Donna Gambrell and Inez Long, as well as me, were the founders of the African American Alliance of CDFI CEO. I think it's interesting to note that the premises that we began in, and Gary was part of that discussion, was inequities, the gap in the balance sheet of white-led CDFIs against black-led CDFIs. So from that humble beginning of 21 CDFIs, we are now 57. We were 56. We're glad to we'll be announcing the 57th member soon, and we're delighted of that. It really centered around this, and it's pretty well defined in our strategic plan. Three premises, three pillars that we sort of found the foundation of our work. One being building capacity, making sure that our members has the capacity to do the work, this important work that they are doing. And the second piece of that pillar is building bridges, and that is to build bridges by identifying products that are aligned with the needs of Black communities to ensure that we are helping Black communities not only grow, but to be sustained. And the third area is building power. We think that's very, very important, not power for the organization or power for individuals, but it's the power to influence the unintended consequence. And I say that all the time, believing that policies that had the negative impact of inequities for Black communities and Black organizations, we want to impact that legislation. And so with the collective and collaborative voices and partners, we hope we can really impact the racial wealth gap that we'll talk about a little bit today. So thank you, Amber.
Absolutely. And so, before we get into the direct conversation between Gary and Lenwood, which is the highlight of our broadcast today, I just want to remind everyone, whether you're tuning in through LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, feel free to drop any questions in the chat. After this discussion, we're going to go to our audience. We want to know what questions you have for them, what you'd like to hear more about. So as you drop those comments in, they'll be coming to me so that we can have a Q&A session towards the end. So please feel free to do that. And so, not to delay the main event any longer, I'll turn things over to Lenwood and to Gary to begin this really important discussion as we kick off Black History Month. Lenwood?
Good. So thank you. Gary, I want to sort of set the context. Perhaps you will add some numbers to this, but I want to begin with a couple quotes that I think says much. And the quote came and on Martin Luther King Day at the Action Network breakfast. Secretary Janet Yellen says, "From Reconstruction to Jim Crow to the present day, our economy has never worked fairly for Black America." And then she went on to say, really for any American of color. But to say that from Reconstruction to Jim Crow to the present day, our economy has never worked fairly for Black America, that's a powerful statement. And then I want to remind us 64 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King wrote that the inseparable twins, the twin of racial injustice was economic injustice. And then King went on to say that the problem of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power. In other words, that if change is going to happen, it has to be not traditional. It cannot be business as usual. And then Frederick Douglass said in 1857 that power concedes nothing without a demand. And perhaps that's a rallying cry for us to begin to look at some of the staggering numbers that we see. The data over the past 3 decades say some pretty shallow things, and really, if the writer who wrote "Shame of the City," "Shame of America" would write today, he would say still "Shame of America" in the context of the data that we see. Let me share just a little bit. The average wealth for white family has grown by 84%, 3 times that of African Americans. The racial wealth gap is glaring. The median wealth for a white family was $188,200 in 2019, compared to unbelievable $24,100 for Black families. And this information came from the Federal Reserve 2019 survey of consumers finance released in September 2020. And so within that context, Gary, and you perhaps will have others data to add, but tell us what you see and how you see the state of Black America today in that context.
So thank you, Lenwood. And I'll just say that the state of Black America is a state of emergency.
All right.
Black people in America today are worse off than they were in 1968. And this is according to Robert Putnam in his latest book called Upswing, where he does a pretty deep analysis on how African Americans and other groups are faring in our country. And what he found was, from an economic perspective, there are other ways we're doing better. But when we look at the data on how well Black families and Black individuals are doing in our country, we are worse off in 1968. So I'd say it's a state of emergency for our children, for our families, and for America. Because as the fate of Black people go in America, so goes the fate of America. And that we've proven with COVID that we are all inexplicably intertwined in this mutual tapestry of destiny, as Martin Luther King would say. And that part of what has occurred, and you went back through some of the history. I'd just like to refer our audience to a fantastic book called The Condemnation of Blackness by Camille Jabril Muhammad, who's a professor at Harvard of history at Harvard University. And he actually does an analysis that basically takes off from 1870, when the first census came out, soon after Reconstruction, to demonstrate how Blackness was criminalized. So you had companies like Prudential and other companies doing actuarial analysis of the 1870 census, finding that somehow Blacks were inferior to whites, and that Blacks had criminology as part of who we were. And so this legacy of what has happened through our criminal justice system, through the banking system, through the housing finance system, through our health systems. These disparities that we see actually were documented as a part of a overall strategy to create inferior black people in our country, and to point to data that was erroneously put together to do that. And ever since then, black people have been targeted to condemn us just for the color of our skin.
Wow.
So I bring it closer to home. 1960, black people had the highest marriage rate in the country in 1960. Many people don't realize this. 60% of black people were married in intact families. And many had moved from the north to the south to jobs that existed at that time. And so overall, blacks' wealth in the 1950s actually rose significantly from just the Great Migration that happened in the 1950s. And so, the reality of it is that many of those jobs dried up. We had social policy designed so black people couldn't participate. And I think many of the audience will be aware of the New Deal. The New Deal in America created the most productive country on the planet Earth, created opportunities for folks to have jobs and economic opportunities, created opportunities for home ownership. But we weren't allowed to participate. My grandfathers, and I'm sure yours as well, many of them who were fathers fought in various wars of this country. But back when they created the New Deal and they created the GI Bill, for the most part, blacks couldn't participate in that. So what built the middle class in America, we were left out. We were cast aside. And then in the 1960s and early 70s, you had President Nixon call for a war on crime, which later became a war on black people, because over a third or more of our black young men have been put in incarceration. And we know, because of how Jim Crow was operating at that time, that many of those folks that went to jail and have went to jail since the war on crime, which is still going on, went to jail on unequal terms. A great example of that is the cocaine rule. Let's take that. So you had a rule for cocaine where whites that snorted cocaine would get less time than blacks that would smoke cocaine, right? And everybody knew it was not right, and it was illegal, et cetera, but we continued to perpetuate, our courts and everyone else continued to perpetuate this unequal treatment. We had 3 strikes, you're out, and people calling us predators and creating the super bill that put many of us to jail. So, as a black man in America, my mother would always say, if you're not an angry black man, you ain't a black man in America, because you got a lot to be upset about. So all I can say is right now, the work that I do and many of all of you do at the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs is about righting a wrong.
Yeah,
it's about accessing that blank check that Martin Luther King talked about, and I Have a Dream, accessing that check, and it's a blank check that actually needs to be written to all of us to address the whole history of denied opportunity. Now, I'll just say this. In light of all of that, there are strengths that black people have. And we have some deep strengths, and we can't get there talking about all the deficits that we find ourselves in. We have to build the future based on our strength. And so when I was coming up, my mentor, Joseph White, who's a professor, was one of the first African-American psychologists in the country, PhD psychologists in the country, among that group. He came up with the 7 strengths of black folks. And so black folks actually have some deep strengths. So I'm not going to quote all of the 7 strengths here, but I'll just have a few. So we black folks, because of what we've been through, we have the strengths of having gallows humor. So we've had to laugh at adversity to move forward in our lives. And so we've developed this strength. We also have a strength of a collective will that has kept us surviving all of these years. So Black people, our people, my people, have the strength to actually move mountains in this country. This country, for example, wouldn't be the democracy that it is today without having to confront some of its demons and injustice. And Black people led that movement of people that actually transformed our democracy in this country. If you go back to the Civil Rights Amendments, to the Constitution of America, you can even move up to the civil rights, a series of civil rights act that happened in the 60s, to even in present day, we are shaping the context of this country. So whenever you talk about these things, I think it's important that we lift up who we are, we lift up what we're about, and we lift up many of our strengths. Our women, as an example, have had to put up with all kind of indecencies and degradation, but have lifted up. And I'm just so proud that my mama and my grandmama and her grandmother put all of this fight in me so that we can continue this struggle together to address some of these inequities. Our battle has just begun. Even though we're 400 years in, we are just now at the point where we have Black people in critical positions all over this country that have risen to top level positions in corporate, government, in public sectors, in the nonprofit sectors. We actually have the ability to craft our own agenda for our people today that we didn't have 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So there is no excuse. There is no excuse for us not to take the next step on this journey, Lenwood. So I'll stop there. I could go on.
Well, Gary, you said a lot, and if I was an artist and I were painting, and I would take what you painted and put it on a plaque and put it on the wall, it'll be kind of blurry. So let me ask you a couple questions. Have we made any progress, any measurable progress? And if so, how would you define that progress? That's one question. And the second one is, what do you think we need to do to change some things around that we know is hindering our progress?
So, these things there's a lot of nuance. And there's a lot of variation. So there's mixed things that have happened for African American people, depending on where you live in the country, depending on how enlightened the folks around you are with regards to addressing these issues and seeing the need to do something. So there are pockets of bright light that we can show that given the opportunity, given the access, given the ability, we can actually move the ball. So for example, let's look at entrepreneurship. Black people are among the top entrepreneurs in the country. We actually have accelerated our growth in entrepreneurship higher than anyone else. In fact, Black women are the top growing entrepreneurs in the United States of America. And so we see some hope on the horizon, because we know without having an economic base within our community, and not without having Black people that are in business, that we wouldn't have the opportunities and jobs and opportunities and contracts and opportunities and other things that we have that actually can show that we are actually adding value to the economy, but we're adding value to our communities because African American people hire Black people, our people, at a higher rate than anyone else. So having and creating jobs in our community is a big plus. On the housing front, what we know is that in 1970, the average home ownership rate for Black people was about 40%. And here we sit in 2020. And just let me say this, home ownership is the number one way to create wealth in America, right? If you don't own a home and you're not accumulating any kind of assets, then you're poor, not from an income standpoint, but from a wealth standpoint. So you can have a lot of income and very little wealth, right? Does everybody understand that? You can have a lot of income and very little wealth because you don't have any assets. So home ownership rate, 1970, 40%, 2022, 44%. So the main number one way that you increase your wealth, Black people have not participated. In fact, we saw in the Great Recession, the biggest wealth transfer in this country's history with the mortgage foreclosure crisis that happened, where Black people actually were getting into homes, et cetera, et cetera. They were getting ripped off, right? Meaning, the predatory. So on the back of Black folks, of the predatory lending market that the banks and others participated in, we really saw the whole economic system collapse in 2011, pretty much. And so, this is how important Black people are to this economy. So it's a mixed bag, I would say.
Yeah.
But for the most part, when we look at asset creation by states, so every state gets ranked, Black people on every one of those measures are further behind than whites on every measure that you look at from an economic perspective within this country, including income. So I said, let's not talk about income, but income, we're the lowest in the income bracket. From an educational standpoint, we're far behind. So yeah, we have a long way to go. But I want every Black person on this program to know that, one, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you end up in this situation that you find yourself in today. Because if you just think, okay, so you worked hard all your life, you went to college, your debt for going to college was much higher than your college because they had wealth that they could depend on. Mm-hmm. You work hard, and as many of us know, we have to work twice as hard and have 3 times the credentials as everyone else coming in the picture. In fact, the data, you could take somebody with a high school diploma that's white, and they have a greater propensity for higher wealth than a Black person with a college degree. Now that we're talking some shameful. Our analysis at Prosperity Now shows it would take over 250 years for Black wealth to equal the wealth that white people have today if nothing's done to intervene in this current system. So I don't have 250 years. I don't know if you got 250 years, but it clearly indicates something big has to happen to change that. Last year, Prosperity Now and the Other and Belonging Center did a report, did a survey, a national survey, validated survey to look at issues of the criminal justice reform and look at issues of economic interventions that would be needed for African Americans to do well. And what we found was even in the height of the George Floyd reconciliation or what have you, the riots that took place and the peaceful protests that took place in the streets of our country, what we found among white people was that only 20% of those whites in our country felt that there was a need to do more to address the issue of racial justice for African Americans. Did you hear what I'm saying? Only 20%. Only 20%. Now, when we ask the same questions of African Americans, 80, 90%. So we're living in a world that people have different worldviews, right? Meaning Black people's worldview is that we haven't gotten our just a payback and repair for what has happened to us. Whereas many whites feel, and a majority of whites feel, that we've gotten more than our fair share.
Well,
so please, let at least let you get in here a minute.
Oh yeah, but I was just going to say to that point. One, I was reading where literally your research says right? It'll take almost 228 years plus, if nothing else changed, for Black folks to get to the point where white America is today. The other piece of that is it appears that every time there is a little progress, that we become the recipient of what's called as white backlash. And so how do you see that manifested and the progress that we seem to make, but then it stagnates, right? We think we're making progress, but we're really not going anywhere. I've always cautioned that the racial reckoning discussion that needs to take place in this country will never take place until there is truth to the reality of the way Black folks are treated in this country. There's never an opportunity that we really want to sit down and say, yes, we have to admit racism is real, institutional racism is still functioning, and we got to have a concrete discussion about how do we deal with the problem in order for us to all move forward, because we're not going anywhere. We want to be here. We fought, we died for this country. We love this country, but yet still, based upon just the data alone, prove that we have not made the kind of measurable progress that we should make.
Yes, Lenwood, everything you said is true. I would add that our democracy is in danger.
Okay.
Meaning that if a person can't that does everything right, plays by the rules, and they can't succeed and prosper in our country, they can't move up the economic ladder. The social mobility is stagnant in America, not just for African Americans, for middle class whites as well. But if we can't have a system that actually allows people to benefit, the social contract is then broken. And the social contract that we have in America has certainly been broken for Black people. When we look at the Federal Reserve as an example, and they're now thinking about raising interest rates because of inflation, and I can understand that. But what happens is if Black people have the unemployment rate that's twice, and still to this day, that's twice that of whites, when you lower the interest rate, that has a deleterious effect on Black unemployment. So the full employment, according to the country, according to the Federal Reserve, is 4%. But for Black people, it's 8%. So when you set that bar at 4%, you're automatically freezing Black people at 8% or 10% or 15%, depending on the sector in the community you're in. So we've created a structural problem within how we think about easing the inflation or easing recessions on the back of African American people. And I would say that there's been a benign neglect of our issues at the federal level. We're seeing a little bit of opening, but we've seen a couple drastic things that have happened that lead us to believe that we need to really put a lot of energy in organizing our people to fight back against what's happening. So I'll give you an example. One is the Build Back Better plan that Biden had authored and had put forth to Congress. That got beaten back on a partisan basis within this country. And it got beaten back, but that bill would have done so much to change the trajectory. So we'll take child care tax credit as an example, which actually did more in a few months to lift Black people out of poverty than just about anything in recent times outside of the earned income tax credit. But what do we see happen? We've seen that program, which we knew made a difference for us, not move forward under the Build Back Better plan and other big things that were in that bill to actually move us forward. And nothing happened, meaning they could do that with impunity. We saw the George Floyd criminal justice bill and the companion bill to that that would have changed some of the dynamics of our criminal justice system and how we're treated as citizens in this country. How we're the ones getting shot at, killed, put in prison. We've seen that bill go down, and nothing happened. I think it's time for African American people to use their power to build this movement, to create change in this country. You do not have time to wait. We don't have any time. We don't have time to wait for progress to happen. Progress has to happen now for our people. And I'm asking everybody that's listening to this broadcast to stand up and do something in your community, in your place, to join this movement, to change the conditions for our people. Too many people have died before us. And as Fannie Lou Hamer said, who's one of my heroes, said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I am sick and tired of sitting there having this conversation, Lenwood.
Oh, me too. Me too.
It's a condition for our people today.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned the Build Back Better bill, because there was so much in it that would benefit, I think, long-term our community. It would impact and scale our community in ways that we could not even fathom. But here's the problem. Anytime it appears that Black folks going to benefit in what is perceived as a majority way, there's a hindrance. There's this failure to really support a bill that moved progress for Black Americans. And to your point, unless we get off the sideline, unless we begin to make our voices heard in masses, we will still have this conversation. I mentioned that Martin Luther King talked about economic injustice 64 years ago. I don't think we want to have another 64 years where our successor will be talking about what's the progress. And we have failed to hold accountable our leaders to make change happen. We have to sound the trumpet, we have to sound it fierce, we have to sound loud. That you remember the paper that you and Bill Bynum and Donna Gambrell penned, the fierce urgency of now is now. We at the Alliance put together an African American Alliance Equity Impact Scorecard. I call it a look in the mirror. And if you are really serious about measuring the impact of dollars flowing into underserved communities, you ought to be able to take that instrument and say, am I building organizations or am I building communities? And I want to submit to you, the problem is that we built too many organizations and too far less communities. And that unless we get really serious about changing communities, changing attitudes, changing things in the community, we still going to be talking. And I'm saying that the talking is over. We need to get to action now. The fierce urgency, as I said, is now. And I think I got a warning that I only had a minute. So
we didn't spill through this time. Let me say something here. So there was a movie called A Beautiful Mind. You might have seen it. It was about Professor John Nash, who was a economist and a mathematician at MIT. He goes on to win a Nobel Prize. Well, he won his Nobel Prize for how groups operate in non-cooperative games. And his work has been used in negotiations on international peace treaties and the SALT treaties and all kind of stuff about how do you win when you're in a non-cooperative relationship. And so part of his equation is called the Nash equilibrium. His equilibrium, which is world famous, basically says this if we apply it to Black folks. So you had mentioned white backlash. So if whites don't see it in their interests to address the issues of African Americans, and Malcolm X once said, can America provide freedom, justice, and equality for, at that time, the then 22 million African Americans that exist? And his answer was at that time, no. John Nash's equation really talks about this issue of if, in fact, whites don't see it in their interests, then nothing will change because of the power dynamics of who holds the power. You know, I lived in South Africa for a year studying economic inequalities. And one of the things that I learned was 10 years after the revolution, even though Black people had the right to vote and have all those things, they still don't own and operate the means of production within that country, so that they're still very poor. Even 10 years after they had a peaceful revolution in South Africa, and all over Africa, you see the same conditions. I was in South Africa, I was in South America, in Brazil 2 years ago, before pandemic. And what we found was Black people in Rio de Janeiro and all of the places in Brazil are still worse off than they were. So this is a pan-African thing. This isn't just in the United States Black people are doing well. We're doing poorly in every country on the planet because race, this caste system, as Isabel Wilkerson says, that we've created, creates the conditions where your skin color matters. Your race matters within the context of that. So as long as we maintain the caste structure, we will contain and maintain the separate, but not even equal system that we've created for African Americans to thrive and survive. So I say John Nash, but the other side of his equation, so equations have two sides, right? And they both got to balance and equal. So the second part of his equation and the hopeful part is that what he also said, that groups that don't have as much power but have strong social cohesion actually can win if they're united in their approach to the problem solving. The issue for Black people isn't so much what white people do. It really is about whether we agree on what is our agenda and how we're going to do that, and how people get peeled off of an authentic agenda for African Americans that get peeled off by those in power, and they'll have their Negro of the day, Negro of the week, or Negro of the month, and we all prance up there as the Negro of the month and act like we're important and we're smart and this, that, and that. And then the next thing you know, you no longer the Negro of the month because they got a new Negro of the month. And we consistently to each other, be it in an urban area, in a small town, or in a big city, we consistently are our own worst enemies when it comes to addressing issues of economic and social justice for our people. So it can't be somebody else coming outside our community telling us how to do what we do, or telling us what the deal is. We need to build strong social bonds and cohesion with each other.
I agree.
And then we got all kind of stuff, you know, oh, I don't like him because something happened 20 years ago, he, et cetera, et cetera. And, we can't go into these situations acting and treating people the same way we got treated. Yeah. That's why I actually believe we have to have a different frame. So Martin Luther King started on this when he started talking about the beloved community. Yeah. You all know about that, the beloved community, right? Why was he saying that, right? I mean, this brother, as the more I study him, the more I see he was both a genius, a prophet, and somebody that actually knew what they were talking about. Because what he talked about, he started talking about a beloved community because he saw the Nash equilibrium without having any of the math. He basically said, well, unless we can convince other folks to join our cause and to be part of what, you ain't gonna get there if you yelling at somebody, you did all this stuff to us and you guys, et cetera, et cetera. You scaring people to death, right? You scaring white people to death with that, right? So how do you address the backlash is where I'm trying to go, and I'll close out here. So I actually believe that we have to have universal goals that work for everybody. So if opportunity was on the third floor, many of us could take the escalators. Some of us would have to take the stairway. And then, if you're in a wheelchair, you differently situated to that opportunity than others, and you need somebody to build you an elevator, or you ain't getting to the opportunity on the third floor, right? So these are just different conventions. You don't hear anybody saying we shouldn't build elevators. Elevators are terrible, because that elevator helps everybody. Right. And so this idea of having targeted solutions, depending on how people are situated to opportunity is a critical way to overcome white backlash. Because what you're saying to them is this doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. This doesn't have to be you lose and we win. We can all win because you know what? There are 7, 8 people that own most of the wealth in this country, right? And they're pitting us against each other and seeing who comes out, and we all doing poorly. So the whole idea is making sure that white people benefit as well as we do from the changes in the policies that occur, but that the history also gets taken into account, and that the remedy, such as baby bonds or reparations, that the remedy actually meets the needs of transforming the system. Because other than that, some people are talking about we're going to have a civil war. Have you guys heard that?
Yeah.
Have you heard that? Yeah. That's out there. Yeah, I'll let you get in, Lenwood. But I mean, I'm not into fighting the Civil War unless I have to, right?
Yeah, I don't want to fight neither. Amber,
right.
Do you need it now, Amber?
Thank you, Lenwood, for turning it back over. We could talk about the state of Black America and the challenges we're facing, I know, for hours. And you all touched on so many different facets of this, everything from the need for community, the legislative changes, our history of exclusion that have all led to a lot of the, just alarming statistics that we're still facing in terms of equity in economics. I do want to take a few minutes to get to audience questions. If you guys still want to hang out with us for a few minutes. And so this really comes back to, I think, Gary, when you touched on the conversation about asset building. So we have a question from the audience that says, African Americans' knowledge of savings and investing significantly lags other groups. How do we begin to address this gap at a local level? Either of you want to take this one or first, feel free.
I will take it. I will push back a little bit on it because, in fact, there's a book called Scarcity. You should go pick it up. We were asked the question because, in many ways, low-income people are actually better at savings and their money and allocating their resources because they have less of it than middle-class folks. Because of what they, so it's just like, you have more money. So you make decisions because you have reserves that you can depend upon. And so your decisions don't have to be as finite. So in many ways, there's a misconception that Blacks and other folks don't save at the same level as white. That's not a true statement. And in fact, in many cases, and I'll just use my own, my grandmother took me to the rummage sale, took me and said, boy, I'm going to show you how to save $1. And she took me all over and taught me the value of $1. And I'm sure many of y'all out there had the same experience. So it's not a unique experience in the Black community because this is transfer of knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. So with that said, I will say that number one, we ain't gonna save our way out of this. Even if Black people save 50% of their resources, they'd still be behind. And that we need to look at not just and there's nothing wrong with saving, and there's nothing wrong with being financially literate and having financial abilities, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have income, right? Wealth is really income minus assets. Right. So if you got, right. So this is wealth, right? There's no complicated formula. But I think there's some perception that somehow Black people are less thrifty than other folks in the population. And given what we've been through, I'd say that's a misnomer. However, there is a need for us to form our own investment clubs. There is a need for us to have a way to formally transfer knowledge about savings and about financial well-being to the next generation. And we have organizations like the Links and the Boulay, and you could go down the list, but we don't have a uniform kind of transfer of knowledge within our community that happens in so many other communities outside of ours. So we need to think about, as people of color, as Black people, how do we inculcate so that every young African-American child has the ability to know how to read, write, and articulate and computate, right? Meaning, because if you can't do those four things, you can't compete in our society, in this society we're in. So I would argue that that is the key to that. But we should start from a positive frame about Black people and not a negative frame, because so often I've written all kind of reports and stuff, and there's been all this negative stuff about us. The only way we're going to get out of this situation is believing in ourselves and reinforcing the strengths of our community. So I'll stop there, Lenwood, let you take it.
Yeah, I think you make some good points, Gary. The only thing I would add too is really reordering our spending priorities. The sociological term of conspicuous consumption said perhaps that we need to recycle our money in our community more, because the person was right that as I looked at the data, we do not have the pension beyond the small pension. We don't have the stocks. We don't have that other asset, main in real estate, that allow us to build equity. And so I think, that's the only thing I would add, Gary, to that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, the time has come, gentlemen, to bring this first session to a close. I do want to give you both an opportunity to give some, just your closing statement. I like to call them those Jerry Springer final thoughts. So if you have a final thought you want to leave with the audience, please do that, and then we'll turn it back over to Lenwood for a quick announcement and to close our session. But we certainly want to thank everybody for joining. Now we'll get the closing thoughts from our speakers.
Gary, go ahead. And
sure, I'll be glad to. One, I'd like to let everybody know that they can actually get this data at their fingertips for their community on our scorecard, Prosperity Now's scorecard. ProsperityNow.org. Just hit the scorecard, type in your place, and you can get all the data you ever want on asset and wealth for African-American people in your community. So I want to say that, and go to ProsperityNow.org to get that. Also, and this will help you have information at your fingertips that you can use with your policymaker and others to actually affect change right in the community you're in. You don't have to go anywhere. The second thing I'd like to say is, again, thanking Amber, thanking you, and thanking Lenwood and all the folks behind the scenes that helped put this production together. The African American Alliance of CDFIs, CEOs, which I am an honorary member of, thanks to Lenwood and Donna and the rest, Inez. All I can say is the future for our community doesn't reside outside our community. It actually resides with each and every one of us. We, in the African American Alliance of CDFIs, it epitomizes the fact that we can actually amass power. We can actually amass influence. We can actually expand our reach if we work together on a concerted effort to do that. If we do not work together, we can't blame anybody else for our situation or conditions, because it is on us. So I am going to put the weight on us to take the next step on this journey. And we've been through a lot, folks. We're going through a pandemic right now where we're suffering some of the worst conditions for our people in the country. And so if you're in a position of power or relation or have influence, this is a time for us to actually get behind each other and move that boulder over the hill, not just up the hill, but over the hill. So I am with you. I'm excited. I'm ecstatic. Come to Prosperity Now. Join us in this movement. We are building partners all over the place to address these issues. Power gives up nothing without a demand. Thank you.
All right, Gary. You said a whole lot there. I would only add that As Dr. King said, the time is always right to do what is right. And that I would also add that if we're going to really leverage the power that we have, we're going to start demanding accountability with those who lead for us. The accountability is beyond just a seat at the table. We have to use it for greater access and greater resources and thinking bold. I think there ought to be $1 billion program for economic development, specifically for the African American community. That's my thinking. It may be outside the box, but we have to think outside the box in order to move where we think our community need to be. So, Gary, I want to thank you today for this conversation. You was rich, man. You have a wealth of knowledge. It's always good to be in your presence. And Prosperity Now and your leadership is doing great things, and we are glad and delighted that Prosperity Now is a partner of the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs. And by the way, you can reach us at our website at aaacdfi.org, and stay tuned to our social media channels. We look forward to you joining us at our upcoming live stream on February 15th at 2 p.m. on nonprofit lending and affordable housing. You heard this conversation that Gary lifted, and I echoed that if we're going to build asset, it's going to have to be with ownership. We can't save our way through it. We have to own something. I come to this workshop, and I think you'll get some tips. You'll find out what leaders are doing across the nation to ensure that Black Americans increase home ownership, which, by the way, over since 2008, our equity in terms of housing has decreased by a small percentage rather than increased. I was completely taken back when I saw that data. Mm-hmm. Gary, I couldn't believe it, that when it comes to home ownership, we have fallen, not increased. With all the wealth in America, that was a blow for me to take a look at it. And so I'm hoping that there were some takeaways from all the information that my good friend Gary shared. And I hope more than anything that it mobilized you to want to do more, to want to reach out, because it is, you remember this word? Fierce urgency of now. And if we don't do it, who will do it? And if not now, when? And so it is not only our legacy is now, but it is something that we're going to have to keep moving on. I understand we have another question from the audience. I'm always saying that if there's somebody who wants to be enlightened, let's take it, and then we can move on. We'll give a short answer, but I do want to honor someone.
Awesome. Well, I'll just pitch this to you guys, and as you have gone through your final comments with this last question from the audience, which is in 1972, the first National Black Political Convention was formed. Do you feel we need a resurgence of that movement, or can we utilize technology to bring the same effect?
I'm not in favor of another convention. I'm not in favor of another convening where we sit around and pontificate and analyze and get into this paralysis of analysis. I think it's time to action. I think it's time to call folks to the task ahead of us. We can strategize all we want to, but at the end of the day, if we don't do anything, we just met, we just ate, and we didn't do anything but get full.
So I was a part of, if I am identifying what the questioner is asking, I was part of this movement that created the Black really was a Black agenda back in the 1980s. I think Manny Marable was leading that convention. I was there in Greensboro back when I was a very young man. And I would say that there is a need for some type of forum, whether it's that type of forum or others, where we actually communicate both on a local and a state and a federal level about what our agenda is. There are vehicles that can do that, the NAACP, the National Black Congressional Caucus, the Urban League plays that role as well. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights played some of that role, but there's really no place that I can think of that just talks about African American people and our needs and our interests. And we are a huge tent because we're not all flaming radicals. We're not all conservative. We are universal people with all kind of interests and all kinds of political and social views. But we do need a big tent in some ways to say, what are the 5 things we want to accomplish out of this White House in the period of time that they're there? We need to agree on those things, and we need to move those balls forward together. And I get my power from you. You get your power from me. And if we could say we had 10,000 organizations that were behind us and 10 million people that were moving an agenda, we would have power. I'll end here. I once had a dinner with a senator who will remain unnamed. And I was up in Minnesota. I asked him, I said, well, why do you think it's that Black people have it so tough here in Minnesota? What's going on? We got some of the worst disparities in the country, most liberal place in the country, but worst disparities in the country for Black people. He said, that person looked at me, the senator, and said, Gary, the problem is you don't have any power. You don't have any power. He said, if you had power, people would pay attention to you. They would be doing what you're bidding. But the fact is that when you walk in the door, you're a great guy and everybody likes you, but you don't have any power. Nobody in your community, I can go to 50 people and get 10 different answers about what we should be doing. And so as long as I can do that, there are communities in America where I couldn't get away with this, or we couldn't get away with this. So we know that if we actually mass together and build power together, we can actually move the ball and move the agenda. That's what Martin Luther King was doing. He was building power. That's why he was assassinated. And so for us in this day and time, we need to build power with each other. We need to let go of our individual stuff. Whatever happened to me or you did X, Y, and Z, we need to let go of that. We need to walk in the door and we need to win. That's what Black people need. We need to win. Keith Ellison up in Minnesota is a good friend. He's the attorney general. He won the Chauvin case, as many of you know, who the officer that killed George Floyd. But he created a win. I see I'm getting the boot, so I'm gonna stop there.
Did we just
Yes,
did the showtime at the Apollo music? Sorry
Yeah,
about that, Gary.
You got on music. You got to stand ovation. You got to stand ovation.
Yeah, please do finish your comment. Please do finish.
I think I was pretty much done. All I'm saying is that where there's no hope, there's possibility. Where one doesn't see any opportunity, doors do open. We should have hope for the future and hope for our people. We have genius in our community. I've seen it. We have people geniuses, right? And we need to make sure that we are willing to stand up and fight for what we want. Now, I'm not telling you to go do January 6th or anything, so I want people to get there. But I do think to actually speak truth to power, the time is now. So I hope I help anybody on this audience think about how they could actually be more effective. And then, tools are available to you. Please reach out to Prosperity Now. We have tools on our website that you can use to help you organize within your community to build power. Thank you.
Yeah, Gary, I guess I agree with you in the sense that if we have a meeting where there's purpose, and that purpose is how do we put together an action plan to make something happen, I could definitely support that. But how you have some of these conventions, and you come up with party breakout session, and you come back, everybody confused, everybody pumped up, but nothing happened. So I do think that if we begin to utilize more effectively places like the Urban League, NAACP, and Prosperity Now, these national organizations, that we can begin to have greater impact. But I still say that those who have been entrusted by us to be at the table need to do more than eat at the table. That's all I'm saying.
No, and I totally agree with you. I don't want to go on because I won't get that music back on. But all I can say is, number one, you and I met, some years ago, and you have been pushing and cajoling and moving an agenda. You're leading an organization that has somewhere around $4 billion in capital that's expended. I'm sure I'm getting that number a little wrong, but it's up there.
It's
and so you sit in a position with your colleagues, if you agree on what the agenda should be, to actually move the ball.
Yeah.
And I will do whatever in my power, whatever in our power to help you do that. So I am so enamored with the AAA, the African American Alliance of CDFIs, and the work that you're doing. And I will go out of my way to make sure that work happens in a way, because without that economic base, without the work you're doing right now, we don't have a chance. Even if we were to get the reins of power, we don't have the infrastructure to actually distribute the capital. And so you're creating that forum. So thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah. And you were part of it. You have birth, and you provided the initial contacts and seed money for us to grow and develop. And so
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll never forget that. All right, Ms. Bond.
Okay, well, we want to again thank Gary and Lenwood for coming together to have this important discussion. We want to thank our audience members for tuning in. And just to reiterate, session 2 of our series, Our Legacy is Now, will be on February 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day and start to your Black History Month.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate you again, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Amber.